we go.
I'm a spark, I'm a fire, hit the start on desire.
Oh, there you go, there you go, there you go, there you
How
go.
it feels to be free. Hold my breath, walk the flame. Now I won't be the same.
Just like that, hunting for walleye. Oh, wow, dude. Yeah.
Good way to start the morning.
Beautiful hit.
It's my life. It's my life. And I'm living like the whole wide world is an open road to drive. It's my life. It's my life.
There we go.
I'm in love. I'm a dream.
Oh, look at that fish.
In between.
Oh, there he is. Nice jig in the middle, walleye, right below the pontoon. There we go. Look at the size of this beast. Unbelievable.
It's my life, and I'm living like the whole wide world is an open road to drive. It's my life.
Bam, I think we hit bottom. There we go. Doubled up. Nice. That's a good one.
Whole wide world is an open road to drive. Life.
And we are live and back again, and I'm actually really excited about this next episode because it's two phenomenal anglers that are, I can't even begin to tell you how much information you're going to gather. So you might want to get a pen out, or you want to get ready to, or you know what, just go back and keep watching it over and over again if you want, because this is all going to be uploaded and you can watch it just right on our website. And while you're on the website, make sure you check out all the deals that are happening on, scroll through the stuff, reach into the dealers and the boat dealers as well, because there's a lot of good things happening right now. A lot of people think, oh, well, I can't even buy a boat anymore. Everything's sold out. Well, you know what? They're not lying. They are sold out at the manufacturer side of things, but some of the dealers maybe ordered an extra 10% of their orders. So there are boats that are available to them. And if you buy now, within the next 2-3 weeks, you're going to be applicable to a lot of spring catch items, or whether it's warranties on the motors, extended warranties, or whether it's just product and gear that you can get in buying a boat before March 1st. There's a lot of options, a lot of reasons why you should buy a boat now, as well as maybe an opportunity of changing colors. So some of these dealers may be able to change the colors of the boats to maybe match your truck or match the color you might prefer. So you know what? Reach out to a Lund dealer today, or a Lund dealer near you, and basically, hey, make sure you might have a chance of getting exactly what you want. So that is going to be limited. So I'd be doing that sooner than later. But the two next guys that are coming up, brought to you by Lund Boats, I can tell you right now, it's pretty impressive anglers, and we're the first time we're going to actually be doing this. It's a walleye episode. So we've talked about doing walleye at the fishing show for a long time, because walleye is such a big part of Canadian angling. And what we want to do, and what we're going to do, is next year we will be actually creating a walleye segment. So along with Muskie Sunday and the Bass Academy, as well as the Great Lake Trolling, now we're going to be adding a real lady anglers episode for next year to our live panels, and as well as a pike and walleye. So we're going to have a pike episode later on this afternoon. But as soon as we come back from this commercial break, we're going to come back with Ted Takazaki and Jeremy Smith. So we're going to keep going. So I'm sorry about that. They're just loading some stuff up still in the background. So, but like I said earlier, going back to the boat situation, I really think you should reach out to a dealer and find out and let them give you reasons why you should buy a boat now instead of 2 months from now. So we are going to go to a commercial break now.
At Mercury, we're driving marine innovation forward with intelligent, intuitive solutions that improve the boating experience. All of our investments in engineering and in manufacturing over the last 15 years have given us incredible capabilities to deliver advanced technology to the industry. We completely reimagined outboard performance to design an engine that delivers boaters the freedom, luxury, and power to pursue their passions on the water. I'm proud to represent the more than 7,000 Mercury employees across the globe in introducing the most advanced outboard ever designed, the new Mercury 7.6-liter V12 600 horsepower Verado. The future of outboard performance begins today. We're really proud of this engine. It captures what's possible when you apply consumer feedback to design marine propulsion as a complete ecosystem that incorporates digital controls, intelligent fuel systems, hydrodynamics, propeller design, and all the other concepts that Mercury has mastered. The V12 Verado delivers a new level of capability and luxury for Mercury and provides boat builders options they never thought possible. And finally, as you should expect from the leading innovator in marine propulsion, this launch marks the latest, but certainly not the last leap forward in Mercury's journey to redefine performance and reliability for boaters.
Freedom to seek new horizons. Luxury beyond expectations. Power to reach new waters. The Mercury 7.6-liter V12 600 horsepower Verado outboard. Powerfully crafted, gracefully refined.
You know what? I have to honestly start this segment with a wow. You know, this is like probably the fifth or sixth time I watched that commercial. It was only released yesterday, and I can't believe there's a 600 horsepower motor out there right now, and it's actually incredible. I just want to see what that boat's going to look like. That's going to hold that motor 5 or 6 years from now. But obviously, it's for offshore boats. But that is one hell of a beast. It's probably the best way to say it. 600 horsepower. Ladies and gentlemen, if I had to bank anything on who's going to probably be one of the first guys to run one of these, it might be one of these two guys. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Jeremy Smith to the screen. Jeremy, you there? And Ted,
hey, yes, I am.
Ted, how are you, buddy? Can you hear us, Ted?
Doing just great. Yeah, you bet.
Hey, Jeremy.
I can hear you. Yeah.
That's incredible. 600 horsepower.
Yeah, it's nuts.
Like that is like absolutely incredible. I don't know.
Amazing technology.
You know what? And that'll start relating down too. So to all their other motors. So I'll tell you, it's pretty awesome. But Ted, you know what? Jeremy, you know, every year I want to say thank you because we can't get enough of you. Like you're a book of knowledge and you keep coming back and we want you back again next year. And now you're going to have to come back a day earlier next year because we've now made this whole going to be a big segment that we're going to attach to a fishing show. And I really think walleye is huge. Well, it's huge North American wide. And, you know, not because because you're obviously part of the muskie panel as well. So just adds to this. So we're pretty excited. And next year, I'm booking Ted today. So make sure he's going to have us in his books for next year because we want him here because I love Ted. So, you know, it's pretty cool. Are you guys excited about the segment, like doing a walleye segment together?
Well, I am. I would imagine Ted is as well.
I mean, you know, Jeremy and I have known each other for many, many years. He's part of the Linder Media Network, and you know, all those guys are good friends of mine. So
phenomenal group thing.
Is he back on?
Was over here. I was listening to your conversations, and were you saying it's like -50 where you're at? Ted, what temperature you guys at there? Or was that you, Jeremy?
Yeah, where I'm at, when I drove in,
Not quite minus 50 here. I think
bringing
it's about minus 18.
We
Yeah, it
got
was
a bit of a
minus
slag, but
29 here Fahrenheit, so it's quite cold.
wow. Well,
Yeah.
you know what? I'm going to let you guys get on with this presentation because I think somehow we're slagging between us. But can you guys touch up a little bit on ice fishing too? Because walleye's big for ice fishing. And yesterday we had a walleye segment and we had actually incredible amount of viewers on it. So if you could just quickly touch on that part of it, only because I think that that's important. And the other thing that somehow if you can incorporate it towards the end of the thing, maybe I could come back on and I'll ask you, but like think about like what makes a walleye boat, like what are you looking for in live wells, what size boat is good for you, not necessarily, well, what would be good for an average angler. So anyways, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to leave you in some very capable hands. And I'll tell you right now, there's no better than what I'm showing you right now when it comes to walleye. We got Jeremy Smith and Ted Takasaki. So take it away, guys. Thank you very much. So
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate it. Ted, do you want to kick this off or do you want me to?
Why don't you get it, and then I'll just follow in whenever I can, you know?
Well, that sounds great. So yeah, so coming to the ice fishing deal about walleye that Andy mentioned right there, it is really popular, and we do a product called Angling Buzz Ice. We distribute through YouTube, and interestingly enough, anytime we kick out walleye content, it's one of the highest performing things that we do for ice fishing. So panfish are popular, but walleye are very, very popular as well. So right now, when you're talking about a walleye bite, it's about as tough of walleye fishing as there is February in anywhere you're at. It just gets tricky this time of year, but you can still catch them. It just seems that the windows are much more narrow unless you're fishing in some of the more far north places. In Ontario, you get that stained water. There can be walleye bites throughout the day, but even those fisheries, I've really seen it happen, you know, that half hour before dark to just after dark, and you'll get waves of fish coming through. So there's still a bite, but it's not the early ice all day thing that it was early in the season. If your season's still open, you know, into April or wide open, like where Ted's at in the Dakotas, the bite gets really, really good late ice.
You know, I think the thing is, as it is with any kind of fishing, is mobility. You know, I mean, the ability to be able to move around, to keep on drilling a lot of holes, going from spot to spot, location is still really the key to catching fish. And when it comes to ice fishing, I mean, that is crucial to be able to move around. And you know, we've got tools nowadays with the Humminbird 360, the Mega 360, and now Mega Live is coming out. You know, we're going to be able to see further away from wherever we're sitting to where the fish are, and then pace out the distance and the amount of distance that it says, and then start drilling holes again. So it's pretty amazing the technology we have.
Yeah, so that's a great segue just into fishing technology as a whole. So like Ted mentioned, some of the stuff that we both use. One is 360 imaging, and if you're not familiar with what that is there's a transducer. If people are familiar with side imaging. Side imaging is a beam that shoots out to the side of the boat, so it gives you a picture. It's basically a razor thin beam that as you pass along, it gives you a really detailed image of what's below the water. And now Mega 360 imaging takes that same technology and it's basically spinning it with two transducers, so it paints that picture in a circle around you. Now, for ice fishing, we found this to be exceptionally incredible for finding transitions. So a lot of times you find walleyes, whether it's a rock to gravel transition or a gravel to mud transition, those fish being on those lines. And if anybody does a lot of ice fishing, they know that drilling a lot of holes, especially late in the winter, can be a lot of work getting through all that ice. So with a technology like 360, you can line up and say, all right, I know that at this angle, this is where the transition line is. This is where the fish will be traveling through. And you can cut holes on that line, and it makes you far more efficient ice fishing than just kind of going out and looking down with a flasher and hoping that you're in the right area.
Well, without a doubt, walleyes are very structure oriented. So to be able to locate these structural elements and then precisely go drill near or around those structural elements with this Mega 360 is really going to be, I mean, it's just phenomenal, the technology, and to be able to do that with precision is truly the key to catching more fish.
It definitely is. It's pretty remarkable what's on these boats. You learn so much. I mean, that's the one thing a lot of people ask us, "Gal, well, you guys are professionals. You've got all this expensive equipment at your fingertips," and we do, because that's what we do. But there's so much that can be learned from this technology. So if somebody asks, does this stuff really help you catch more fish? Yeah, it really does, and it makes you a better angler because you see things that you never knew were there, and you have a better understanding of how things laid out. Stuff that you might have fished your whole life, all of a sudden you use this mega imaging technology, and the picture is painted for you, and you go, wow, I always wondered why on this particular shoreline, why that was always the best spot in front of this white house. Why was that so good? Well, gee whiz, it was a stand break, and there was 8 giant boulders there with some cabbage plants growing next to them, right? And that's where the fish always sat. So before that, you just kind of knew it was a good area, but you might have not known why. And now you can go back and replicate that, and you find so many more spots that are key to catching fish.
There's no doubt about that. And when it comes to ice fishing, I mean, there's no shortage of a little bit of work involved. I mean, and they've come out with these augers nowadays that are just so easy, so quick, that it takes all the work and the effort out of cutting holes. And really cutting holes is the key. Is I mean, sometimes I might cut 20, 30, 40, or 50 holes in a day if I have to.
It is. So fishing is fishing, and Ted brings up a good point there, just drilling holes. Like, you wouldn't go out to a spot in the summertime and just anchor on one spot and not catch anything and just think, well, that's that. Ice fishing is more work to move than it is to pull up an anchor, so to speak. So constantly being moving and drilling. I mean, I'm almost never, I just drill. Like, I like that. I like finding fish more than anything. So when I'm ice fishing with a group, I'm pretty much the guy who's always on the drill. I just cut until we get some good information that we're really around fish, when we can pick that area apart more. And coming back to some of that technology that we've been talking about, what's been really fascinating that we've seen with 360 and also with underwater cameras is that often you'll pull up to a spot, you'll drop this technology down and go, oh man, it's loaded with fish. There's like fish 20 feet over there. There's like 6 big wallies there. There's 3 off this edge. There's a bunch over here, or if it's basin crappies. You start drilling the holes, and all of a sudden, where those fish were, when your auger breaks through the ice, those fish scatter. They move. They'll move off to the side. They'll move over here. So if you're just looking with a flasher, you don't realize they're there. So what we'll often do is we'll drill that whole area out, keep an eye on that technology, and then you can go back and walk to the holes where the fish actually are. Because so many times what we're learning now is you might have been on a good spot, but you're kind of displacing the fish as you're drilling. So if you just look with a flasher and don't see anything in 2 minutes, they might be there, but they're only 20 feet off to the side.
No doubt about that. That's definitely the way to do it. Now, in this brutal cold, Jeremy, I mean, we're talking a super high pressure system. We're talking probably the worst conditions. And when I've done a lot of work as far as how weather patterns affect fish, and I'm convinced that we always talk about cold fronts, but it's not really so much just a change in water temperature. It's actually the high pressure system that accompanies a cold front. Right behind that cold front, you've got very high pressure system, and the high pressure system acts like a hand pressing on the surface of the water, and essentially the walleyes and the fish can feel that high pressure system, and it just doesn't be like somebody sitting on my stomach. I wouldn't be very apt to feel like eating. And I'm pretty convinced that is really the key. It's not so much the water temperature, it's the high pressure systems that accompany these severe cold fronts.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense to me, Ted. I mean, you see it, like you're saying, in ice fishing, you take water temperature out of the equation. In the summer, you might say, oh, the water dropped 4 degrees after this big front came through. Well, it's just flat out cold now, but the fish react the same, whether it's open water ice fishing, when those when those systems come through. So walleyes obviously are pretty susceptible to northern pike, which we'll talk about later. Believe it or not, those are some of the, I think, the best conditions that you can have is a big cold front for northern pike, especially big pike. I've caught my biggest pike in those conditions. So not all fish act the same under those, but walleyes, largemouth bass, muskies, they tend to really, really dislike that kind of weather.
You betcha. And I've been running around in this machine called a snow bear, Jeremy. I'm really impressed by this machine. It's like a big fish house on snowmobile tracks. It raises and lowers to the ice. I've got my Humminbird GPS on the dash. I just drive around until I'm on some sort of structure, and then drop the machine down, put the Mega 360 down, and then start fishing if I'm marking fish, and then from there on move around. And this brutal cold, it's just hard to really do anything on the outside, and it's always a nice comfortable 68, 70 degrees inside the snow bear.
If you guys haven't seen what a snow bear is, you should look at it, because what Ted is talking about, like, that is the ultimate in transportation, comfort, mobility. You want to really have like a cool experience. Those things they're just unbelievable. Really cool.
It's an unbelievable machine. And you know what's amazing, when I drive around in that snow bear, like 2 feet of snow, if it's just snowed 2 feet, you there's no way you could drive a truck out on 2 feet of snow on the ice. That snow bear just glides over the top of that snow. It's just so much fun. It's kind of like I don't know. I suppose people describe skiing in the Rocky Mountains in 2 to 3, 4 foot of snow, just gliding on top of that snow, and that's essentially what I'm feeling in the snow bear and that kind of snow. So it's not only a great experience as far as fun fishing out of, but it's also comfortable.
That's really cool.
Plus mobile.
Yeah, it's very mobile. So Ted, let's change gears here. So the first time that I ever fished with Ted, I wasn't actually fishing with him. I was filming. We used to produce a series for FLW, the Walleye Tour, and that was on Lake Erie. And I was like, oh, sweet, I get to go with Ted, because Ted, I forget what your record was, that, he just this pile of giant walleyes. And I know Bay of Quinte, in your neck of the woods, we filmed out there actually, and obviously some of the biggest walleyes in the world. But Ted has just an incredible breadth of knowledge when it comes to Great Lakes trolling. So that is certainly not my strong suit, but I know a lot of folks out there do fish Lake Erie. They do fish on Bay of Quinte, and there's some obviously some of the biggest opportunities for big walleyes out there. So Ted, why don't you dive into a little bit about some of the stuff that you has found to make a difference in being so successful on the Great Lakes?
You betcha. I mean, walleyes on the Great Lakes are some of the biggest fish, in North America, in my opinion, on a consistent basis. There might be lakes where you can catch 20, 18 to 20 pounders, but on Erie, in like the Bay of Quinte, I mean, a teener is very possible. That 13, 14, 15 pounder, and when it comes to trolling, I believe the key is twofold: is putting the lures where the fish are, and going the right speed with the right size and type of crankbait. So what I usually try to do is, as I'm trolling, I'm looking for marks, obviously on my Humminbird electronics. I'm looking out to the side, seeing how many fish how big this school is. If I'm right in the middle of it, on the edge of it, and then adjust I usually troll with inline planer boards, these offshore inline planer boards. And then as I'm looking at the side imaging screen, looking where the marks are, that's where I'm adjusting my lines to try to make sure that I'm close or just above where the fish are. And then it's a matter of speed. And now here's what I believe is the key to any kind of trolling. And it's not to just put the boat into into gear and set the RPMs at one set of RPMs. In other words, don't go the same speed the whole time. You want to speed up, you want to slow down, you want to pay attention when the fish are biting and how they bite. And then I often will take my trolling motor and I will adjust left, and then I might go right, and then left, and then right. And what happens is the inside planer boards stall and the outside planer boards speed up. And then you can determine when those fish bite. So in other words, if I turn to the left, my inside planer board stall, and then I start turning to the right, and then the planer board just starts moving back, then I know I need to pause those planer boards occasionally to get the fish to bite. And that's exactly what happened that day that I caught the all-time tournament record, which was 53.2 pounds on 5 walleyes for the day. And every one of the big fish, the 10, 11, 12 pounders, all came on the pause on that trolling board. And if I hadn't noticed that, I wouldn't have caught any fish. I mean, because when I was going straight, I didn't touch a fish. So in my opinion, it's critical to pay attention to those little kind of details in order to catch them.
That's really cool. And I think that applies to, so just picture it, it's no different than casting, right? So anytime you're making contact with cover, the Great Lakes, you might not be doing that, or there's a speed or direction change. Those are just simply things that trigger anything to bite. And so applying that same deal on the Great Lakes, like you're talking about, the boards can really accentuate that because you've got so much basically leverage on the outside to speed those things up because they're further away from the boat. And then on the inside, they just start soaking. And either if you're fishing spinners, they're sinking, or if you're fishing cranks, they might start to rise. So you get not only speed changes, but you can also have changes vertically when you make that happen. Now, one of the things that we get asked about a lot and can be confusing is, this is kind of a two-part question, Ted, is, when are crankbaits best for trolling on the Great Lakes? And then when would you go to spinners? And then the whole idea with fishing spinners or something that doesn't have a bill or a dive curve to it, how do you know how much lead and how deep that particular presentation is running based on speed and weight?
That's a great question, Jeremy. I mean, I've got a formula on Lake Erie in particular, where if the water temperature is above 50 degrees, then I think spinners definitely come into play. If the water temperature, the surface temperature is below 50 degrees, then I usually go all crankbaits. Now, sometimes what I'll do is I'll tip a crankbait with a live crawler, but for the most part, that's kind of my general rule of thumb. So when you're looking at April, the water temperature is usually below 50 degrees. So I troll a lot of crankbaits at that point. Then as the temperature flips into that 50-degree range, then I start introducing some spinners. I might make one pass with cranks, one pass with spinners. Now, the spinners are a little bit, I don't know if it's a challenge or a little bit more difficult, but I think the real key when it comes to spinners is that I use a weighting system called snap weights. It's developed by Offshore Tackle. And what I'll do is I'll put, the key here is to make sure that you know how much line out that you have. That's good for crankbaits as well. So I use line counter reels, and then I measure out the line from the crankbait or the spinner away from the board. So I usually try to keep all my weights the same, and then I vary the distance from the weight to the inline planer board, and that's when I'm using spinners. So in other words, I'll put the spinner with the crawler out, say 20 feet. I'll clip on that inline weight, the snap weight. I'll snap that to the line, and I'm usually using an ounce or an ounce and a half of weight, but I keep them the same throughout all my lines. All right, so let's say I keep an ounce and a half weight that I clip to the line after 20 feet, and then from the weight to the inline planer board, that's what I vary. So I might go 15 feet from the weight to the planer board. I might go 25 feet from the weight to the planer board, or I might go 45 feet from the weight to the planer board. And then when I'm trolling, then I just keep track of what fish hit what distance. So it makes it a lot easier than a bunch of different weights, a bunch of different lengths, and you never know exactly where that spinner is running.
That's really, really, really cool stuff. So it's pretty amazing. And it's just amazing how technology has changed and how much better we've got at doing so many of these different presentations. One of the things that Ted and I do most years is we do a thing for Lund Boats called the Ultimate. It's the Ultimate Fish Camp. So it's a cool thing. It's in Minnesota, central Minnesota, on famed Leech Lake, a great multi-species fishery, but a really tremendous walleye fishery. And it's a group of Lund Pro staff that get together, and it's not just fishing. So we do generally 2 outings a day, one in the morning, one in the evening. But the guys get to experience different styles of fishing. So you might go out and jig and wrap fish in the morning, and then you might go out and maybe try slip corking leeches in the shallow sandgrass in the afternoon, or you might get to go bass fishing or muskie fishing or something like that. But in my experience, I've not been walleye fishing as long as Ted, and Ted knows a lot more about it than me, but walleye fishing to me in the last 10 years has changed dramatically, especially how much time we spend in the weeds, like how much more we're realizing that walleyes aren't just out on these 18 to 22 foot break lines. They're spending a ton of time in the weeds. And some of the presentations that we're doing are not just dragging a jig and a minnow or a Lindy rig with a leech anymore to catch these fish. It's gotten a lot more advanced, right, Ted?
Absolutely. What's that?
It's changed.
Yes, no doubt about that, Jeremy. And what we're doing is we're finding different methods to go after these fish. I like fishing weed lines with spinners and crawlers, and then I'll usually tip. I'll usually put, as far as the weight is concerned, either a split shot or a bullet sinker, and then I'll work right on the outside edges of those weeds. But I've also put split shot and just run those spinners right over the tops of the weeds as well. And then another thing is you can also take a jig, a light jig, and polarized sunglasses. Especially if you're dealing with clear water, then you might want to dip that jig into the pockets of the weeds. And I've caught a lot of big fish in the pockets of weeds. So, yeah, I mean, walleyes are a fish that are pretty adaptable. They'll swim around in open water, chasing open water bait fish. They'll hang around the structure. They'll even eat crayfish and other types of bait fish that hang around the structure. But then, yeah, they will hang in the weeds as well, and for perch and a lot of other bait fish. So the key here is they're so adaptable to the type of bait fish that they go after, that a good walleye angler has got to have a wide variety of things in their arsenal in order to be able to go after these fish. And I'll just kind of look back at this tournament called Lund Mania, which my partner and I got third place 2 years ago. And we were just trolling right on the outsides of the weeds. I was actually right. What happens is that the weeds will grow in a certain depth. And on this particular lake called Lake Ottertail Lake, the break lines go from about 8 feet. The flats go out all the way out to the break line at about 8 feet and then drop down into 30, 40 feet of water. And we were just trolling right on that 8-foot break line, right on the outside of those weeds. And that's how we caught all our fish. So the key here, I think, is that depending on the type of lake that you're fishing, if it's a natural lake, the kind that has a lot of weeds and some structure, then you've got to really figure out, are the fish on the structure, or are they in the weeds? And you have to fish both in order to be able to figure that out.
100%. The whole weed walleye thing, and the point Ted made about walleyes being so adaptable, to me, I think that's what makes them such an interesting fish to target. For example, in mid to late June, I do a lot of muskie fishing, but we'll troll open water at that time of year, and we catch a lot of really big walleyes 20 feet down over 30, 50, 60, 80, 100 feet of water. And at the same time, there's all kinds of walleyes that are biting in shallow weed beds. And at the same time, there's fish that are showing up on rock and gravel humps in 18 feet of water. So they're using all of these different types of habitats. They've got pelagic fish like ciscos that they're foraging on. They're eating perch in the weed beds, and they're taking advantage of bug hatches that are happening on the gravel to mud transition. So they're really an incredibly adaptive fish. But coming back to the weed thing. So if you like to cast, which I like to do, and my favorite way to target walleyes is casting. I really like that. And the weed dynamic has been a real eye opener, and how many fish are in the weeds. Early season is often best, but it happens again later in the year in September, in October. But throughout the year, there will be fish using weed beds. And believe it or not, jigging through those weed beds can be one of the most effective things to do. There's one of the, let's see if I can find one here. I brought a couple baits in. One of the lures that we've just been having exceptional success with is one is a jig in a plastic, but secondly is a bucktail jig. So bucktail jigs have been around forever. It's like the original, it's the original dressing on a lure, right? So this is a bucktail jig here that we would fish with. And now when we're fishing with baits like this, it's a reaction bite. So the idea is that you throw this bait in, you let it hit the bottom, and you make the bait jump and fall. You make the bait jump and fall. So you're not, it's different than if you're fishing a jig and a leech or a jig and a minnow where you want something subtle crawling through the weeds. But when you're snapping a bait like this, not only does it make its way through the cover very well, you get hung up very little, but also the bites are really ferocious. So a lot of times when the bite could be tough, it seems weird. The fish just aren't biting. Maybe we should slow down to a crawler and use a slip cork or a leech and just set something in front of them for a long time. Often the opposite is true. Do something that's aggressive and fast and just make the fish respond to what they're seeing. So this bait right here has been absolutely one of the more magical things we've seen, along with the jig and wrap is another deal that is very similar. So you'll notice the head on this jig. This is a BMC moontail jig right here. It's an aspirin head style jig. Notice the big eye on the bait, but this thing cuts water really, really well. And you'll notice the dressing on it. It's actually quite thin bucktail, so it doesn't have a lot of drag in the water that makes the bait move quickly in the water. And this is one of those techniques, if people aren't doing it, try snap jigging. So it's erratic. It's not just pulling it slowly. It's actually snapping the rod, snapping it, letting it crash to bottom. And it's absolutely remarkable how walleyes love smashing it, and a lot of other fish too.
Well, there's no doubt about that. I think reaction bites are often overlooked, and we always try to figure out, match the hatch, or try to figure out what kind of live bait the fish are biting on. But being able to create those reaction strikes, I think, are critical. It's also critical to have the right kind of equipment. I mean, you need to have a fairly medium heavy action rod to be able to snap that jig through the weeds. You also have to have some sort of super braid that cuts through those weeds. I mean, if you try to just do that with regular monofilament, it's just not going to work very good in those weeds. So a relatively stiff rod. I like using the longer rods, 7.5 footers, relatively heavy action with say a 10-pound test, super braid of some sort tied to that jig when I'm snapping them through the weeds. I don't know how you feel, Jeremy, but that's kind of how I do it.
Yeah, and if anybody has questions along the way, please chime in. We're here to answer any questions along the way. So Ted brings up a good point about so that's Ted's system for snap jigging. That system works really, really well for this type of thing. What he really hit on there was using a heavier power rod. So and then the action of the rod too. An extra fast tip is really big for this. So if you're fishing a rod that's too slow, what I mean by that, if you're saying fishing like a medium light or something like that, when you go to snap it, the rod is going to like bend in half, and the bait is going to drag, and it's going to get the lure caught in the weeds. So having that extra fast, heavier power rod is what's going to allow the bait to shoot free from that stuff. So absolute braid and mono are one of those things that when it comes to cover, braid is almost always the best choice for fishing in cover, simply because it can cut through the cover, and it's not going to, mono often will just get caught on the weeds. You get a big clump of weeds on it, and you can end up losing your fish because of that. If I'm fishing sparser cover, though, for snap jigging for me in shallow water, I still like fishing with mono. And there's, I fished with braid a fair bit, but this is personal preference. So you could ask a number of anglers Ted could say, you know, I do this application on braid. This is how I do it. You could ask Al Linder. He would say, I only fish mono for this. You could ask another pro and they would say, you know, fluorocarbon is the only line I use. It's about what works for you. There are situations where fishing line is absolutely important, like Ted talked about in cover. Braid is absolutely key in cover. But in other situations, you might find you're just using a slightly different rod, power, or action, and a different line with that just works for you and you're successful with it. It's not a right or a wrong often. It's what's works best for you.
I think I also keep both styles of line in my boat. I've had times where a fish will grab a hold of that jig with super braid, and it's so sensitive. As soon as I get the bump and I set the hook, I miss them. And when I switch to monofilament, which is got a lot more stretch, that fish hits, and by the time I even know it's hit, he's got the bait in his mouth. So, you know, sometimes you want a little bit of a delayed reaction. You know, with super braid, I love the super braids, but they also allow you to detect what you're fishing. In other words, when that jig hits that rock, you know it's a rock. When you got it against a weed, you know it's a weed. So those are the nice things about braid. But then, you know, when a fish hits, sometimes you even just, as soon as he touches it, you set the hook and you're actually pulling the jig or the lure out of the fish's mouth. So it's almost too sensitive at that point. And then I've had situations where I'll always keep a monofilament rod rigged and ready, and I throw the monofilament rod out there and then I catch them. So you've got to really experiment with both types of setups and then determine for the situation and the mood that the fish are in, that's when you make the switch.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense. And yeah, I mean, don't forget about mono. That's just a great point that Ted brings up there is that braid it's super versatile. You can do so many things with it. There's great advantages to sensitivity, knowing what's there. But like Ted said, mono, to me, for example, if I'm jig and wrap fishing, or if I'm doing the snap jigging deal in more open cover or gravel or rock, I'm always using mono. I just really like it. Like Ted was talking about, I feel like if you're with braid and you're doing the snapping action, there's not a lot of play in the system. So a fish might grab it, and a lot of times the hook is actually just cutting. It's tearing, where with mono, it's like it's pulling into the fish and it's getting purchased. So to me, that's a big deal. And there's a line that's come out. I've been fishing with it for about 3 years now. It's Suffix Advance, and it's a 6-pounder, and it's the lowest stretch mono that I've seen. There isn't a mono that has such low stretch to it. And it's also a sinking mono, which is kind of cool. Most monofilaments float, but this line the 6-pound in particular is exceptionally strong. I've caught big muskies with it. I've caught big flathead catfish with it. I've caught sturgeon with it, walleyes with it, and I burbot fish with it, catching 10-pound plus fish all winter long. And the stuff doesn't break. It's like there's something weird about this line, but it has just enough stretch in it so that when you're doing that snap jigging reaction, the baits just slide into their mouth. So we've got some questions, it looks like, online here. So if anybody wants to start firing some stuff off, we're gonna dive into the question portion of it here, Ted.
That sounds great, Jeremy. I've got about 13, 14 minutes. I'm actually in Bismarck, North Dakota. I'll be doing some seminars today at the sports show. And so I'm going to have to be getting going here in about 13, 14 minutes.
Okay.
So if there's any directed towards me, if we could address those, and then you can probably stay on however long that you can manage.
Yeah. Yep. Ted. So we'll fire these off at Ted here, and I'll be doing another deal today for pike. So if there's any carryover, I can do it with this one or in the next pike one. But Vincent Barron is asking Ted. He said, "How would you approach walleye fishing in a river?"
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I just had a gentleman at the sports show yesterday come up and he says, "How do you pros figure out these bites all over the world, all over the country?" And what I typically like to do is I like to categorize each body of water that I fish in the 4 different categories. One would be natural lakes, like the lakes you find in Minnesota. Those are all natural lakes. They have a lot of structure. They're usually pretty clear, and they have weeds. All right. The next categorization would be the Great Lakes. I usually the big wide basin. You usually troll in those lakes. Sometimes there's some parts of the Great Lakes that have structure, so then you can cast at that structure with the ripping type of glide baits, etc. But usually I'm trolling in on the Great Lakes. The third classification would be the reservoirs. These are dammed up rivers. There's still a river channel that swings through these reservoirs. I like fishing the areas where the old river channel swings in tight to shore. I believe that the walleyes use that old river channel like a highway going from one end of the reservoir to the other end of the reservoir. The third type of body of water that I categorize everything into would be the rivers. All right. So when it comes to rivers, current is the king. You know, walleyes are current oriented fish. They like current, but they're not going to sit in the current all day. You've got to find areas where there's some current breaks, where the water actually changes direction, is where what you're looking for. So on the Mississippi River, there's a lot of wing dams. Wing dams are fish magnets for walleyes. There's all different kinds of fish that use the wing dams as their dining table, and because the wing dams, they stop the current. So there's a current break or an eddy in the front of the wing dam. There's a current break in the back, and then on the edges as well as the top, there's current breaks all throughout those. Sometimes some of those wing dams have a hole in it, and so there's a lot of current going through that hole. So there's several different areas where there's little eddies where the walleyes will hang. So current is the key to finding walleyes, and what they'll do is they'll sit in just little slack water areas and wait for their food to go by. The real aggressive fish are going to be at the top of those wing dams or at the top of the rock piles, right behind it, waiting for the minnows. And see, the minnows and the bait, they don't like swimming around the current all day either. So usually you'll find the bait, the current, and the bait and the walleyes all in the same areas, and that's where the current breaks are.
I think you nailed it with current being king there, and you know, a few other areas to look for in rivers are places where there are confluences. So anywhere you've got a smaller tributary coming in, those can often be really good areas to hunt for walleyes. And then depending on the size of the river, if you're fishing a smaller river, particularly in the summer months, log jams, if it doesn't have wing jams, log jams can be one of those areas that's overlooked, where the walleyes will use log jams almost like a wing dam, where there'll be fish in the front when they're active, fish in the middle of it when they're, I mean, we'll fish them sometimes like you would bass fishing, where we're flipping into the heavy wood to pull walleyes out. And then of course they'll be on the back end seam of it. So, you know, rivers are such dynamic fisheries that fish can utilize different sections of a river too. So don't be afraid. Just that's the other thing with, I'm sure you've seen this too, Ted, like you might go out on the river and fish this 2-3 mile stretch and have really poor fishing and apply just what Ted talked about, and you're not catching fish. If this was spring, for example, there might not be many walleyes in that particular stretch of river. Fish in those systems can move long distances. So don't spend, if you're not getting bit, don't spend your day just making like these little very small moves. Start making big moves throughout the system until you're seeing signs of life and you're getting contact with fish, because rivers are dynamic and fish can move great distances in them. And often the big concentrations of fish are just in different areas.
No doubt about that. Electronics, I mean, if I'm not marking fish and I'm not catching fish, I'm moving. And that's really, I mean, walleyes are on the move constantly. They're not homebodies really like bass are. Bass kind of set up spots, and you generally find them in areas, and they usually sit around a little bit longer, but walleyes are always on the move, in my opinion.
They are. They definitely like moving, and river fishing for walleyes is great, especially this time of year. Like if you like river fishing and you like walleye fishing, what's just around the corner is the peak of the walleye fishing in rivers. To me, that early season, you can get those big pushes of fish, you know, areas where you've got a big lake with the river leading into it. You know, you're getting a lot of fish pushing into that current. So it's a great time of year. So Ted, we're going to try to tackle another one here before you've got it take off here. And so this is from Bill. Bill, I'm going to just butcher your last name. So I'm just going to say thanks, Bill. Maftarak, I think is what it is. Sorry for butchering that, Bill. And he asks, do you use your fall spots as your starting points during the hard water season?
Oh, that's a great question. And yes, I do. I mean, I'll take for example, I'll bring up an example here where I fished this little lake called Lake Ponset right before it started icing up, and caught perch and walleyes on the deeper edge of that area on this lake. And so I wasn't on that lake until it basically froze over. And then once it froze over, I'd already put in a waypoint in my boat. I took that same waypoint and then downloaded all the waypoints from the unit on my boat, downloaded the waypoints, put it into my ice unit, and then as soon as I put it in that ice unit, then I went right back out to that same area and caught the perch and the walleyes as well. So I am convinced that that these walleyes, what they do is that they'll sit on certain areas during the open water season, and then as soon as the ice covers up the lake, that's when I just went right out to those same waypoints. So anybody who likes to fish open water and ice fish, then what you want to do is take all your waypoints. In fact, what Humminbird has done is that you can take the same Helix 7 or Helix 9 or a Helix 10 and just transfer the head unit to an ice box and a little ice carrier that's got a nice transducer. You have all your waypoints on that machine, and then just in a portable version instead of your boat. So you can just walk around with that, or take a snowbarrow or snowmobile, drive to those same spots and check them out real quick. Where they were during the fall, I believe they're pretty close to where they are as soon as the first ice comes up.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%, Ted. Looks like we've got Andy just jumped in here.
All right. Hey, Andy.
You're on mute there, bud.
This technology, I'm just glad that I'm not a big pixelated monster. How that some of those videos you see on television where somebody just doesn't look at all like what they look like.
There looks like he's tuned in now. We can hear him.
Yeah, man. So I said, Jeremy, you're not going anywhere, but I just want to say thank you to Ted, because I don't know, when was the last time you were at the fishing show, Ted? It had to be like 5 or 6 years ago. And
yes, probably something like that.
We missed you, dude. Like, honestly, we've had a lot of people after the fact say, you got to bring Ted back. You got to bring Ted back. And, we're unfortunate with this COVID, but we're fortunate to have you here with us today. And we really appreciate it. And obviously a lot of education there and a lot of information that hopefully guys can utilize, and they can always watch it over and over again to make sure you get out every bit of it. But so you're in Bismarck right now. Is that where you're at?
Yes, I am. Bismarck, North Dakota. It's cold up here too.
Well, I just want to say thank you, buddy. And again, I want to book you now for next year, because we're planning on going with a full-blown fishing show next year. So we're hoping you're going to be here to join us. So hopefully it makes it in your schedule. So
you betcha.
Thank you very much,
really
Andy.
You betcha.
Thanks,
yeah, I
Ted.
Thank you very much. So what we're going to do, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go back. We're going to go to a commercial break. We're going to go to a commercial break, and then we're going to come back with Jeremy and talk more walleye, because you know what? It's incredible. It is a species of fish that really needs a lot of attention, and those little things matter in catching fish. So we'll be right back in a few seconds.
What lies beneath can no longer hide. New Mega Imaging Plus uses high-frequency sonar to show you fish and structure up to 200 feet below your boat and 200 feet out to either side. No more secrets, no more guesswork, just a clearer picture of the world below, down to a fish's species and direction. Because more detail means more of this. only from Humminbird.
Okay, we're back. How are you, Jared?
I'm great. I'm awesome. Awesome. That was fun. Ted's just a wealth of knowledge. He's a super cool guy, and I always love talking with Ted.
Yeah, you guys are all from that world, and from when it comes to walleye, I remember talking to Al years ago, and he told me that he was always more of a bass guy, and then the walleye just kind of transmissioned into that whole Linder deal, and it's kind of flowed with that over the year. But then over the years, and then all of a sudden, you guys start bringing in guys like yourselves and writers, and everybody's kind of got their own segments, and all of a sudden muskie becomes a big factor, and obviously tomorrow we'll see that. But the walleye has always continued there, you know what I mean? And as well as bass and everything else. So I just feel like, this is 100%, and watching the questions that are coming in are pretty awesome. We're going to get into those in just a second, but there are definitely a lot of interest in the sport. So I'd like to start off with a couple of questions too, because there was a couple of questions that were asked yesterday during the ice fishing segment, which I think one in particular is because one guy kept asking, like, if you're drilling a hole, right, should you be fishing right after you drill that hole, or do you need that water to flatten out a little bit? Or do you drill like a numerous amount of holes, like a big circle, and then by the time you get to your last hole, go back to your first one, start fishing that one, and then kind of move down? Like, how do you approach that kind of stuff?
Well, the answer is, yes to all of the above. So it really depends on the mood of the fish and what you're fishing. So Ted and I kind of talked about this earlier with some of the stuff that I've seen this season now, having used Mega 360 on the ice. And sometimes when you drill a hole, I'll use like basin crappies, for example, but it could be any fish. It could be a walleye. You drill that hole and you landed right on top of a big school of fish or some fish. A lot of times they're spooky, but there might be several of them there. So if you drill that hole and you can get a bait down immediately, you could still have a chance of catching that fish. But if you wait a few minutes, just even a couple minutes, I mean, it's almost like when you see a fish in the shallows, if you can cast to it before it really knows you're there, you've got a good chance of catching it. But once you get up on it, it's spooked. So sometimes it really pays off. But what we're really finding, and I would recommend this to anybody, is if you've got a good spot that you have confidence there's fish there, if you've got this technology, great. Most people don't. But the lesson that we've learned having used it, so you can apply this if you don't have that technology, is if you've got confidence in a spot, drill everything out right away. Drill as many holes as you think you're going to need. Don't drill them 20 yards apart and drill 6 holes. Drill the holes 10 feet apart, cover the whole area, because what you'll see is the fish are moving very slowly. So drill the whole thing out, start fishing through that whole area. You might want to go back to the first holes you drilled, but just start bopping around all those holes and let things settle down for 10, 15 minutes, and you'll just start to see the fish cruising back through that area.
Okay. So Victoria's got some questions there. Are you loading them up, Victoria? All right. There's a question. I don't got any class. That one, she's not that one. I don't know why. It just shifted on her. So, but before you get into it, I just want to ask you one more question. So, one thing that you said was, I used to do a lot of rip jigging back in my day. We call it, rip jigging and stuff like that. And it is very effective, like extremely effective. It's a lot of work. If you're not ripping it fast enough, you're getting a lot of weeds, right? So, but I want to go to the rivers. You guys talked about the river system. So, in where we're from in Central Ontario, and this obviously now with this whole, it covers all of North America, this episode, but like we have a system called the Quinte system, like the Quinte, Bay of Quinte. And the thing is, it's not really a river, but it's kind of a long channel. So it's kind of a lake. It does have a lot of feeder rivers into it. How would you approach something like that? Would you be fishing more of the mouth of the feeders, or are you fishing more of the, dominant weed lines, I guess?
Well, it really depends on the time of year. Fish move. So, I mean, as a rule of thumb, earlier in the season, the more likely fish are to be shallow, and earlier in the season, walleyes in particular, the more likely they are to be near current. That's for a couple of reasons. One, they tend to spawn in current areas or feeder tributaries to a larger system. Those are often great locations for walleyes to spawn. But then in addition, this influx of current in those things, it's a magnet for food. And then as the season progresses, often early the weeds aren't developed. You don't quite have the same habitat. So as the season progresses then and the weeds start to grow, you'll just start to see those fish move off. Now that does, fish are fish and they swim around and they do whatever they want. So these of course are rules of thumb, but generally speaking, I'd like to focus on current areas. And when it comes to summertime, if you've got a big rain event or something like that, where those tributaries are pumping in a lot of water, areas around those, again, can be really, really key locations. So generally speaking, I'm fishing current a lot more in the spring because there's runoff, there's more current. It's a good place for walleyes to spawn. And then as the season progresses, you start to make your way out to the weeds and just stair-stepping it back as you get later and later into the year. So it looks like we've got a question here from Michael as well. Andy, you're kind of locked up on my end. So I'm going to take Michael Yoshida's question. I think this is, I hope I pronounced your name right. He said, when would you use an 1/8 ounce bullet weights in Lindy rigging? Well, there's a couple reasons why you might want to go with a really light sinker in that bullet style that you're talking about. Primarily we use in weeds. Ted was talking about trolling spinners over weed beds. So a bullet style sinker is the best for that. It's not you don't want to use a bottom bouncer for trolling in the weeds. You don't want to be using a walking style sinker. The bullet sinker, a bass style worm sinker is the best for something like that. So with an 1/8 ounce fishing shallow weeds, the idea with that is it's going to keep the bait higher in the water column because it doesn't weigh a lot. And then it would be using a spinner, like a spinner rig with a crawler behind it. And so the spinner is going to have lift. The 1/8 ounce sinker isn't that heavy, so it's going to keep things high above the weed tops. But to achieve the depth, then you're going to have to let the bait out a really long way. So when I'm trolling spinners over weeds with like an 1/8 ounce bullet sinker or a 1/4 ounce, 1/8 or 1/4, I'm using a spinning rod for this, like a 7'6" medium light fast action or a medium fast action, a longer rod that's got a little more flex in it. And what I'll do is I'll just lob the bait out a really long distance behind the boat. I'll kind of count it down until I think it's about where the weeds are, and I'll start trolling it. So that 1/8 ounce sinker then is just going to ride right on top of the weeds. And you'll notice that if you start to go to a 1/4 or 5/16 or 3/8, you might start to get into the cover a little bit more, and then the presentation loses effectiveness. So for me, it's mostly trolling over weeds. Or the other situation would be if you're fishing really clear water and the fish tend to be spooky of the boat in your Lindy rigging. So you're seeing fish, but they're just not biting under the boat. You might want to take that same rig, cast it out a fair distance from the boat, not a long bomb, and let that thing sink down to the bottom, let it hit. And now you can Lindy rig with that bait further away from the boat, because often just having a bait further away from the boat can be the best. All right. So we've got something from Warren. And Warren is saying, good morning, gents. Do you like cranks with rattles or silent cranks? Warren, that's a good question. And, I like both. So, I mean, that's just kind of one of those things in fishing is that there's not necessarily a right or a wrong with anything. It's what happens to be working at that particular time. So I love crankbaits with rattles when that's what they want. I love a shatter wrap that has no rattles when that's what they want. But again, this is kind of a rule of thumb, and from what I've seen, this doesn't always hold true, but like a shad wrap is one of the all-time classic cold water walleye baits. It's just absolutely dynamite in the spring, whether you're casting it or you're trolling it. Of course, it works all year long. It's just a great multi-species tool, but it's a silent balsa wood crankbait, and it works exceptionally well in really cold water. It works all year, but it's a really good cold water bait, and it's silent, and fish seem to like that. And then as we get into dirtier water situations, baits with rattles or lipless crankbaits can work very well at times too. So, but I've seen from experience that, the rule of thumb that dirty water makes some sound so fish can find it. Clear water, calm water, fish a silent bait. Fish are so keen. I mean, they're just incredibly keen. There's not a minnow that has rattles in it, and fish can still eat and still get big, whether it's nighttime or it's dirty water. They can still eat. So they know if it's a silent crankbait. They know if it's a rattling crankbait. So the advantage to having something with rattles is if the fish are aggressive, the zone of awareness for that bait is much larger, and your probability could likely go up. So I use both, and it's all about experimenting. So we've got another one here from Sean, and Sean is saying, question for both. Sorry, Ted is gone, but do you use some of your ice fishing lures in the open water season? And well, I can speak for Ted with this a little bit because I can say, yes, Ted does. And so do I. And the number one lure that I use for walleye fishing and for ice fishing, it's pretty much what I've got tied on all the time and what works incredibly well in open water. It's been one of those baits that's revolutionized it. I can't even get these out right now, but it's the jig and wrap, right? This is one of the most effective baits of all time for triggering walleyes to bite. So I'll get one out here. Ice fishing, for example, a size 5 jig and wrap for walleye is my go-to size. Every once in a while, I'll go to a size 3. This is a size 5 jig and wrap right here. You can see it's probably 2.5 inches long, something like that. This is a size 7. It's maybe a little longer, maybe 3.25 inches, something like that. So if I'm looking to catch walleyes, crappies, I catch largemouth bass on this. I catch, big bluegills on it occasionally. Perch, it's one of my favorite perch baits. Cisco's, whitefish, lake trout, everything bite these lures, but they're really, really good walleye baits. Now I fish them a bit differently, open water versus ice fishing. So ice fishing, this bait, I'm fishing it vertical, right? I'm fishing it underneath the ice hole, 18 inches, a foot off the bottom. Every once in a while, I'll bang it on the bottom if it's not weedy. And ice fishing, I'll often add a minnow head. If the fish are aggressive, you don't need bait ice fishing with this. But if they're coming up and you can see on your fish finder, they're not closing the gap, they're just stalling out a little bit, it definitely pays to put a minnow head on here. Now, if I do put a minnow head on this presentation, I'll always upsize the treble hook. So I'll probably get this wrong, but you'll figure it out. I think it's like a size 10 hook is about what this looks like on a size 5 jig and wrap. You would go to a size 8. So you're just upsizing the hook one size if you're going to be fishing live bait on it, simply to get a little more gap in the hook, because that minnow head's going to cover up a little bit of the gap. So a bigger head gets you more purchase when the fish bites it. So I fish this primarily vertical in the water, a lot like you would a spoon, but a little more aggressive rip. So this bait will swim and dart off to the side and it can really get fish's attention. Now in the summertime, this is the size 7 jig and wrap. This is the size I most often use. I'm fishing it differently. I'm usually casting this bait and I'm making contact with the bottom. So it doesn't work. This thing doesn't work obviously in weeds because it gets fouled all the time. And it can be tricky to fish around a really bouldery or rocky shoreline because it gets snagged. But if you're fishing mud, sand, gravel, or areas with sparse rocks, it's really good. So the idea with this bait is it's going to just crash into the bottom. Bang. It weighs a lot. So this is all lead. So it's a really heavy lure and it's banging into the bottom. So I'm casting it just like I was talking about the rip jigging. Cast it out, let it hit the bottom. Snap it up. The bait comes up, it hangs, and then it goes back down. It comes up, hangs, goes back down. So the jigging wrap is one of those lures that it works open water, ice fishing, and it's just one of those tools that catches everything. It works year round, and it's definitely, if you're not fishing jigging wraps, you definitely want to get some in your tackle box because they're a lure that catches everything, and in particular, big walleyes. When we go to Canada fishing, which we didn't get to go this year, but we're always talking about what can we do. We got to figure something else out to do shows on when we're up here, but it just seems like, well, this is the best presentation always, whether they were in June or July or August or September or October. It's like we catch all of our fish, and all of our big fish just always seem to come on this. I mean, there's other things that work, but this is just something about this is magical for walleye. All right, Mark, holy cow. Looks like he's got a big muskie in his profile too. So Mark Brick says, good morning. When fishing big rivers, for example, the French River, and in general, how do water level changes impact walleye location? So that's a really great question, Mark. So, often what happens with flow in the water that we see is fish go upstream, and that's been my experience. Of course, they can go up or down, but when you've got moving water, it seems like the fish tend to go to where the source is. That's what I've seen happen a lot in my home state of Minnesota. I'm 2 miles from the Mississippi River right here, which I fish quite a bit. And when we've got those big rain events, or we've got a lot of flow in the water or current changing, when the current's changing, we tend to see the fish push upstream, and they also tend to push off to the side. So a lot of times people can say, man, the water got really high and fishing just got really tough. Well, you could look at it like this: if the river floods, you could go, man. Well, the fish used to be confined to this small little space in low water. Now they could be absolutely anywhere. Well, yeah, they could, but most often the fish are going to go to some area that like an area with a tributary that's got a big eddy, and fish can get really, really concentrated in high water situations. And conversely, as water levels are falling, you tend to see fish sink back into deeper water areas. And in midsummer, it's often deeper water areas that have the fastest flow nearby. It provides good oxygen, and that's where a lot of the bait species tend to be around that area as well. So typically when the water is coming up, the fish tend to push out, like near the sides of the river or up. And as the water's dropping, the fish tend to sink back down into lower waters. So that's kind of a rule of thumb. But again, it's, there's nothing hard and fast in fishing. So now we're going to jump on to Richard Dunlop. And he said, have you ever used a worm blower on plastic? And I can say, no, I haven't. I really haven't done that. It's a good idea if it works. There are a number of plastics that do float. So, I've got some of those in my lineup that I'll use for drop shotting. I like those when I'm using a bit of like a Ned rig or something like that. But yeah, it's cool. It changes the dynamic of the bait. So if you've got a bait that's just going to lay flat like this in the water, or if you can get something in there that makes it buoyant, just changing the angle like that gives the fish a little more target. So I haven't, but I'm sure it works good. So Cameron Veltman is asking, what's the biggest walleye you've ever caught? Well, this will sound puny to the folks over on the Bay of Quinte there, because it's probably an average, but the biggest I've ever caught is a 13.5 pound fish here in Minnesota, which for us, that's a really big fish. So, but those big giant ones that get caught out there or out west on the Columbia are pretty special. So anyway, that's what I got there.
I want to ask a question based on your big fish. Like, where did the big fish go? Like, I know, like, going back to the Quinte area and Detroit River, like, there are some huge walleye that come into play real late into the season, right? But through the summer, like, where are these fish? Like they're somewhere.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, this comes kind of from musky fishing. And I'm assuming, and you see it with big panfish too, and walleyes at really big fish. I'm not talking about an 8 or 10 pound walleye. Don't get me wrong, it's a big fish, but the really, truly giant fish, they just act differently. A 55-inch muskie does not act the same as a 40-inch muskie. And I really don't believe that a 14-pound walleye acts the same as an 8-pound walleye. So a lot of those fish tend to capitalize on offshore forage like Cisco's. So with some of the technology that we're using now, we've discovered some really incredible bites that we didn't know were happening, where we're actually targeting big walleyes, muskies, big northern pike that are suspended 20 feet down over 100 feet of water. It's crazy with this.
Wow.
With the technology to be able to look out to the side now, we can see that there's big signatures out there. We kind of knew when we could just look down that obviously there's bait out here. There's got to be life. But now we can start to narrow it down and say, hey, look, there's big fish here. And we don't have to just troll openly. We can actually start casting to some of those fish. And we've seen some pretty incredible results. So as this technology continues to develop and we learn more about it. So Andy, my guess is that a lot of the time those fish are out to sea. They do come into cover. I think they do like to be on structure when they're resting, when they're not hunting. But those big fish, I think they've got their windows. They go out to graze and they take advantage of the opportunities for big nutrient-rich food. And when they're done, they come back and they rest on cover. And I think when you get them on structure or cover, it's just the luck of the draw when you're coming and they're going type of a thing.
So like, and I think like we're going to go a commercial break after this and come right back. But like on Lake Simcoe, and I know everybody knows Lake Simcoe, it's great for big smallmouth. The water clarity is getting better and better every year. But like we have some areas where spawning is really it's hardcore, right? And you can see these big fish coming up these rivers. And then you know what? You never ever hear of people catching walleye on Simcoe, but we all know they're there, right? Yep. So like, I don't know, they must be suspending and maybe following the smelt around the lake.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely absolutely do that. So again, it's this a lot of these mysteries that we didn't know, like where are the fish here? Are they not biting? So often we're saying, oh man, these fish are, I think they scatter a lot too. I mean, that's the other thing. So, an observation I've had with smelt would be a good example. Dwarf Cisco act very, pretty similar. The walleyes on those fisheries, what we're kind of seeing is that you can fish for them all day, and it's like they're just not active. But there's this movement, this diurnal movement, where the Ciscos are smelt. They're bunched up during the day, during the high light period, especially in warmer water conditions. And then as the sun starts to rise, you've got these diatoms and these different invertebrates that start making these vertical movements towards the surface. These Ciscos and smelt, they're still in the thermocline or below, but they start making vertical movements to eat. And when those Ciscos are making those vertical movements into the warmer water layer of the water, walleyes, big pike, and muskies are taking advantage of them. And so the fish just aren't eating. They go out, they've got this 1 hour window where they make hay, they make it happen. And from us having fish in a tank at the office here for years and years and years, believe it or not, sometimes fish don't eat for 2 or 3 weeks. That seems weird, but you can have a largemouth bass in 70-degree water. He's in a bad mood. He doesn't eat for a long, long, long time. So the idea that the fish are eating every day, even because the water's warm, it's just not true. It's hard for their bodies to process that food. So if they get a big meal, it might take them a long time. And if conditions aren't ideal, they know when it's good to go. They don't waste their energy till that time. And big fish are just different.
Okay, let's just go to a commercial break and we're going to come right back. We got Jeremy Smith on right now, so we'll be right back in just a few seconds.
Hey guys, Steve from Mega Juice. Show special. Purchase a 36-volt lithium set and receive a free 4-bank charger valued at $650. Give us a call.
Outdoor Canada. Don't miss a single issue of Canada's only national hunting and fishing magazine. Subscribe to Outdoor Canada today.
And we're back. All right. So
right.
just want to talk, because I've been following your whole episode. A couple times I've been off of it. But so only because talking about Simcoe right now, and this is a lot of waters like this, including Quinte, and I'm sure it's water salt. So we got zebra mussels have come into the equation, clarity, walleye, definitely with sensitive eyes. I know they're going for cover. I know they're going deeper. So like, how do you adjust your fishing game? Like you're obviously not fishing the same spots you fished 5-10 years ago. It changes every year, right?
Yeah, it does. And so, we were talking about this earlier, like zebra mussels have come into play in a lot of our fisheries too. And with the zebra mussels on our end, at least, we've seen a lot more weed growth. So more light penetration, better weed growth. And we're seeing a lot of fish spending more time in the weeds than we ever thought. So one thing to consider that a lot of people don't think about is light is habitat. So light penetration, like you're talking about clear water, can be a big deal. So walleye, believe it or not, really thrive in more turbid waters. That's their game. They're there, but they're not as prolific in a gin clear body of water as they would be in a fishery that's got some color to it, like a lot of the tannic colors of northern Ontario. So we find fish are spending a lot of time in weed cover, and then also we're seeing fish, of course, are using a lot of the deeper mud, and they're suspending over mud basins a lot more than we realized. And to catch the fish, again, we're using a lot more of the rip jigging presentations, where it seems like you've got this clear water, not ideal conditions, a lot of light penetration. We're just, what used to work is putting a slip cork and a leech or a crawler in front of fish. They just they tend to ignore it a lot more. Where now, if you're getting something, we're learning, if you just get something really erratic in front of them, they might not be feeding. It might be more of a night window when they're actually hunting, that you can make the fish bite during daylight hours.
So that was actually going into that question, saying like, hey, they're more aggressive at low hours, morning and night. But you just said you could actually approach the midday stuff. So with that being said, like obviously with clarity and that kind of happening, fish line, like fishing line, colors of fish line, are you using braid, are you using mono? What are you using to, how important is that to you?
Yeah, it's a great question, Andy, and it's one of the things we get asked about the most is fishing line. So it's such a complicated topic. So do I use braid? Yes, to floor, all of the above. For a spinning outfit, which most walleye fishing is done with, by and large, you can get away with a 10-pound braid can do a ton of stuff. And I personally like a high vis braid. So most of my spinning equipment, believe it or not, is spooled up with Suffix 832 and a high vis yellow. So it's a bright yellow line, and this goes for, we've got as clear water as anywhere right here. But then I run a fluorocarbon leader to that. So depending on what I'm fishing, if it's a lot of zebra mussels, even though you want to finesse in that cold water, a lot of times you've got to start with an 8-pound or a 10-pound leader, just because if you're making contact with the bottom, you're going to get cut off quite a bit. So braid to fluorocarbon. If you're fishing a bait like a jigging Rap that twists, you want to put a small swivel in line. If you're just fishing with it with a jig or something else, you tie something. You guys could look at this online, an Albright or an Alberto knot to make that connection between the two. But really, day in, day out, for a lot of fishing applications, a 10-pound braid mainline with a 10-pound fluorocarbon leader will get a ton of stuff done.
Wow. And also like going back to the rib jigging, because I love rib jigging. I'm not gonna lie. I'm just into that action, but color makes a big difference, especially like I find that the fish are biting it on the drop, and that's when you're hitting on a rib jig. So like I know that color and the water of you see maybe sometimes see that little twitch on that line, and it doesn't mean you got a small fish. That could be still a 4 or 5 pound walleye, right? So. Oh,
exactly. Yeah. That's why I like that high vis yellow, like you're talking about. We're seeing the bites when it's a slack line, right? When your bait is falling, you've got that visual cue with your line because it jumps off the water because the fish grabbed it. And with a line that blends into the water, it's harder to see. So you can anticipate when to set the hook because you're not actually feeling it because the line is slack.
Victoria's got a question. You're putting up a question, Victoria? All right, here we go.
Okay, Ryan Biggs is asking thoughts on crawler harnesses. Well, crawler harnesses are pretty good. And like Ted was just talking about, whether you're trolling the Great Lakes. Well, here's the thing that I can say. This is going to be pretty profound. So hold on, guys. Is fish like worms.
And leeches.
Like worms. So crawler harnesses are absolutely dynamite. And Ted had that good rule of thumb that when it comes to the water gets above 50 degrees, crawlers can really come into play. So absolutely, we fish a lot of crawler harnesses. If you want to put fish in the boat when the water gets above 50, it's a great way to cover water. The fish love them, and it's pretty easy to do as well. So, but if they're really biting, often it's great to use crawlers, but try using some plastics on the back of these things too, or switching up to a minnow on a harness in situations where you've got like a lot of perch or sunfish or something, because sometimes when you're fishing crawlers, especially if it's in weeds, you can just be getting hammered by little fish, and you're just, or white bass or whatever, you're just losing your crawlers all the time. Where if you fish with a plastic worm on the back of it, or a paddle tail or something a little different, you're selecting more for walleye, and you're often selecting for bigger fish. But crawler harnesses are, of course, they're absolutely dynamite. Lakes, rivers, reservoirs, you name it. Suspended fish near the bottom, fish in weeds, they work everywhere.
So on a crawler harness, like obviously you control them, or you can cast them, whatever you want to do with them. But sometimes I know we troll with them. Sometimes we're going to some of these fly-in destinations, some of these resorts and stuff like that, and we need to get them down deep. And like I know what we use. I'd like to know how you get it down, and then and from that pivotal point, how much line do you have between that to the harness? Like, do we need to have a big distance? Is it something that affects walleye opposed to other species of fish?
Yeah. So how I'm typically fishing a crawler harness, like you mentioned, some of those, go to a flying place, you need to get, or wherever you're at, you need to get the bait down 20, 30 feet. So a good rule of thumb is with a bottom bouncer. That's what I'm using most of the time. Mm-hmm. An ounce for every 10 feet. So if I'm fishing 30 feet of water, I'll choose a 3-ounce bottom bouncer. So that's what's going to give me a good contact with the bottom. And then depending on the clarity, again, it's a rule of thumb. if it's real clear water, you might want to go to a 6-8 foot, fluorocarbon lead with your crawler harness to get it away from the bouncer. If it's the fish are active, you can shorten that up, and you could use a 3-ounce bouncer in 20 feet of water so that the bouncer can be right under the boat. And you don't have to let a line out. It stays right under the boat. You go over them and you just mow through fish. If they're biting, that's great. You want to go heavier, stay tighter to the boat, keep everything as vertical as you can. As fish tend to be spookier of the boat, you might want to use a 2-ounce bouncer in 30 feet of water and let a lot more line out to get contact with the bottom, and a longer lead to be able to, get those fish that are spooked behind you that you can catch. And again, that's what Ted was talking about too. Zigzagging, crawler harness fishing, like on a piece of structure. Don't be afraid if you're long lining something like that. If you've got more line out, bring the boat up. If the fish are in 20 feet, bring the boat up into 15 feet and then turn back out into 20 feet. So that it's going to have a lag to it. The bottom bouncer will. So when you come up into 20 feet, it might only be bringing the harness up into 18 feet and then it's swinging back down, but it's also getting out of the path of the boat. So you can bring it through areas that the fish haven't spooked from the boat.
Wow, that's actually good. You know what I really liked about that answer was like you kind of put a recipe to it. 1 ounce for every 10 feet. Like that was just boom. Like I love that, because it's just, I don't know if maybe me I missed that over the years, but I kind of like that whole recipe. 1 ounce for every 10 feet. Is that correct? Did I say that right?
Yeah, it holds really true. Yep.
Yeah, and that is like, that kind of stuff is amazing to, when you're trying to figure it out, like what should I be using, how far down I want to go. But Victoria, we got another question coming up on the screen right now.
Yeah, it looks like it. Here we go. We've got Sean Wanch, I think is your name. Sorry, I'm just butchering everybody's names, but thanks for asking this, Sean. It says on a crawler harness, when would you switch between a blade versus a smile blade versus a slow death? So to be honest with you, Sean, I am not it's too bad Ted isn't here for this, because he's a guru with the crawler harness stuff. I do it, but I'm not. I can kind of make something up for you, but I honestly don't do it enough that I could say like this is an absolute hard rule of thumb. The slow death versus the spinner thing. I mean, I find that the slow death just works so good when you're around a lot of fish, because with slow death, I mean, it's like that 0.8 miles an hour where you can just get that thing to be absolutely in the sweet spot where it's rolling. It's really good. So you've got to be a lot more deliberate with slow death because you can't cover water. Where with the spinner, you can be you can go a little faster and you can cook a little more. And again, it's got a lot more thump. So the fish know it's there. Kind of, you can select for more aggressive fish and cover more water to find fish. And then the smiley blade's kind of in between. So I hope that answers your question, but I just don't want to speak out of turn, because I'm sure guys like Ted would know. They know a lot more than I do about it, but that's what I would do.
And you know what? Well, next year that'll be a great question to ask at the fishing show live, because we'll hopefully have Ted there and more because like that's the whole thing. Everybody kind of specializes in what they like to do and what they do. So Victoria, do we have another question that we could put up on the screen, honey? All right, so we got a lot of questions, just so everybody knows, and we are putting them up. We're just kind of making sure that some of them are the most appropriate questions. So, and I want to say hi to all the guys that are out there. Jeremy, you might want to say hi to everybody, because there's a lot of guys just saying hi to you right now. So,
all right, well, hey everybody, yeah, good to see everybody. I miss coming up there, and if people are tuning in that have not been to the show before, it is. I'm not kidding. I'm saying this sincerely. This is my favorite sports show. Period. It is. I really miss being here. It's so fun. The people are wonderful. I learn as much when I go to this show as I hope people learn from me. I mean, there's just so many good fishermen here. It's not only that the camaraderie is great, but it's a learning experience for me. I love everything about it. So I'm thankful I get to do this. I miss it. And I can't wait to come back next year. So if anybody's tuning in, they haven't been to this show, make sure you get there next year. So I'll jump into this next question here. And it says, I use a buckshot spoon a lot in the winter ice fishing. I heard they're good in open water. Do you fish with these jigging spoons in open water also? Yeah, jigging spoons are kind of like the jigging wrap deal, where I'm not fishing with bait, so it's just fishing a flashy piece of metal, but it's the same idea where you're really working the bait erratically. It's more of that reaction style bite. So you can do this both vertically or casting and making contact with the bottom. So it is I know that a couple derbies have been won here in Minnesota fishing with heavy spoons in that particular situation. Some of them, the buckshot's a good one. I think I've got one here too. I know that a lot of guys like this style right here, like the Castmaster, just the, just a cut metal spoon, something like that. This is another really good presentation, and it's something we'll use those spoons a lot too when we're in Canada, because that's a great trout bait too. Like Lakers love that thing, brookies love that thing. Of course, pike will eat it, and walleyes will eat it. So yeah, they're used mostly in ice fishing, but they are good in open water, and I fish them a lot like the other reaction baits where you're working it pretty fast. All right, so it looks like Andy locked up on me. We've got another one here. All right, so I'm just going to jump in, Andy. Hopefully you can still hear me. It says, if you were stranded on a lake with 3 lures, what would you want? That's funny. I kind of figured something like that would come up. So, of course, a jig, and it's like, what's the most?
I'm live again.
All right, perfect. What's the most versatile tool that you have, right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. So a jig is going to be your most versatile tool. You can cast with it. You can reel it in. You can hop it on the bottom. You can reel it back slowly. So a jig just can cover all depths, and it can do a number of different things. So a jig would absolutely be my number one choice to have on board. And something like a bucktail jig, that VMC moontail jig, would be one of the baits that I would absolutely have, because walleyes bite it, pike bite it, largemouth bite it, smallmouth bite it, crappies bite it. Everything bites that particular lure. So a jig would be number one. Another lure that I just love, that's overlooked a lot of times for walleye fishing, but I catch a lot of walleyes on it, is an X-Wrap. The X-Wrap size 10 is like my favorite all-time multi-species fish catching lure. We actually shot a piece this year muskie fishing with it's a suspending jerk bait with the saltwater versions of the 30s and 40s, and so the big ones work awesome for pike and muskies. The smaller sizes work great for pike. The size 10 is one of the most deadly. It's the best smallmouth bait in my opinion, but also it catches I've got so many big walleyes on it, I have to throw that in there. And then even when you get down to the size 8, 6, and 4, we just shot a piece this year on the size 4, and it turns out, once you know it, that the size 4 is like one of the most insane little crappie baits that we've ever found. So we just are learning even this year about the effectiveness of that bait, that even a tiny one can outproduce minnows, waxworms, soft plastics. Just like a suspending jerkbait in the spring for walleye and smallmouth can be lights out for anything else, the small size can be that for crappie. So the X-Wrap would be another one. And then a third one, boy, that would be, a really, really tough deal. I would probably go with a lipless crankbait, something like a Rip and Wrap. And just because, very similar to what the jig can do, I can cast it, I can wind it, I can fish it vertical, I can bounce it on the bottom. It's just another tool that's got a lot of versatility. So just off the top of my head, those would be the 3 that I would take.
All right, I think I'm back, and I kind of got to move, and I'm looking at my screen here. Okay, so we are going to wrap this up, but I do need to ask you a question, and it's more of a boat lineup question. Live wells, also bait wells. When you're buying a boat, and not necessarily, I know you're Lund, but what should people be looking at? If they're maybe size of live wells, what do you recommend? Like certain things, rod lockers for certain lengths of rods that become versatile rods. What can, and again, not putting it over the top where, 21 footer, but what can we get away with that can average angler to tilt and have fun?
Yeah. So, I mean, the biggest question that a boat purchase is, I mean, it's a big deal to buy a boat, right? I mean, it's a really big deal. So first question you want to ask is, where am I going to be fishing and how am I going to be fishing? Is it going to be, am I a bachelor that's just going to be running around doing whatever I want? I don't have to consider family or anything like that. So that's going to play into it. So do you want a tiller boat? Do you want a wheel boat? I mean, those are the first couple questions that you're going to want to ask. And then, am I going to be fishing big water? I'm going to be fishing smaller bodies of water. And that's primarily going to impact the length of the boat and the size of outboard that you're going to get. So, tiller, console, bodies of water that you're going to fish. And along with the bodies of water that you're going to fish, if you're fishing a lot of smaller bodies of water, you like getting into more remote locations or tougher accesses, definitely look at getting a roller trailer. I would never fish anything but a roller trailer because I like doing that, as opposed to a bunk, because the roller gives me a lot more opportunity to get into new places. And then you know, the storage is a big deal in a boat. To me, it's a really big deal. And that I've talked to a lot of guys. We happen to run Lunds, but everybody always seems to be impressed with the storage in our boats, like floored at how much stuff that you can put in our boats. Our boat, like we're multi-species fishermen. We fish for everything, and we can have muskie, largemouth, smallmouth, panfish, walleye stuff all packed into a boat. And I don't run a big boat. I run an 1875 Pro Guide with a 90 horse tiller. That is my all-time favorite boat. The boat is insanely seaworthy. I'll take it up on Lake Nipigon. I'll go 50 miles across Lac Sewell. I'll take it anywhere. I'm supremely confident in it, in its big water capabilities, but it's like a Corvette. If I want to back troll, there's nothing better for back trolling. I've got the tiller. I can do it. If I want to forward troll, I can do that. If I want to cast, it's just, I can maneuver the boat so well. So the size of the boat will also impact how well the boat handles in terms of cornering and things like that. But if I fished only on Lake Erie, that would obviously be a poor choice of a boat. I'd want to travel in that boat. It becomes when you're in a tiller in a big exposed body of water like that, you'd want to look at something like a Crossover, an Impact, or a Pro V, or a Baron, or a Tyee, you know, depending on what your budget fits. So to me, it's is it a family deal? You know, like we have we run 3 boats through the office here. And the one that has just been so popular is the Impact, and the Impact SS that Lund has, because it's a family boat, and we take that thing to Canada. It's an incredible fishing boat. We put a kicker on it so we can troll with it, and it's got the ski pylon on the back. It's just an awesome boat. So look at what you're going to be doing, how big of water you're going to be fishing, and then you can just start upsizing from there.
Dude, I was going to say, I can't, you know, you're incredible. We're going to see you this afternoon. We got a pike seminar. You and Big Jim are going to be on that this afternoon. That's also a new segment. So we might probably next year put walleye and pike and make it a show segment for a morning seminar. I think it would be awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, I think it would be really good. And there's a lot of people that, again, they fish both, and you kind of fish a lot similar alike, and probably a lot of these questions are going to be pretty similar. We might have to repeat some of these answers this afternoon. But dude, go grab yourself some lunch. Thank you very much this morning. And we'll be seeing you this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, none other than Jeremy Smith right here in front of you. I can't begin to tell you how blessed we are to have guys like that in the industry. And they're not people that hide their secrets. They're more than happy to share them and make your fishing that much better. So thank you, Jeremy.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, Andy. I appreciate it. All the best to everybody who tuned in. Thanks for watching. And thank you guys. We'll be back again this afternoon to talk about pike. Big jacks.
So that was a great episode. I was very, very pleased with it. And I don't know, there was so much information that was going out. And again, these are things you can constantly upload down the road and just kind of maybe, you know, recap what they're talking about and everything that they did. So again, we have all kinds of stuff coming up, and I believe we're going to go to a fish cleaning presentation in just a few minutes, or am I off on that? So we are going with fish cleaning. Okay, Victoria, I can't read if you're writing a really light color. And then Bob Izumi. So Bob Izumi will be on immediately after the fish cleaning presentation. And again, he'll be live as well too. So you'll be able to ask questions, and we'll keep that on track. And we got all kinds of great things coming up, including a trolling presentation coming up this afternoon with Paul Faust himself and Shane Toom. So we want to make sure you're part of that, especially if you're going to get involved with the new salmon, the salmon hunt that started last year. This year starting July 3rd all the way to August 29th. It's going to be a great event, great prizes, and a lot of fun.
There are people who know that there's more to getting there than just getting there, who know that going fast isn't fast enough, and who know living isn't the same as feeling alive. They're people who aren't afraid to stand out, make noise, make waves, and never look back. This one's for them. The Mercury 115 horsepower and 150 horsepower Pro XS outboards. Built to win tournaments. Designed to win your heart. Mercury, go boldly.
I got a new toy to show you that I'm really excited about.